But as we begin today, one story lords over sport beyond all others, a bit like the man himself. Virat Kohli has retired from Test cricket. It's a seismic moment in international sport and a significant closing of an era in cricket. Kohli has been his generation's most profound figure, the first great all-format batter, and the man who transformed Indian cricket on field in parallel to the country's rise as the sport's economic and political powerhouse. Kohli was a captivating leader and a mesmerising batter. He cast drama and he courted drama. He did nothing less than transform his nation's character. And so much of his legacy is intertwined with Australia, team and public alike. Almost a comic book love-hate figure on these shores. He started here as a young man, flipping the bird to aggressive crowds, and finished with his inflammatory confrontation of our teenage wunderkind. In between, he won admiration and at times affection, but at the end, he was booed from the stage. And perhaps it was always destined to end that way, and maybe that was more natural anyway. He finished grizzled and abrasive, having started young and volatile. On his maiden Test tour here, Kohli's career was somewhat in limbo. It was said he was a player who oozed aggression and attitude, if not always good judgment. His century in Adelaide in January 2012 was an innings to flesh the bones of his case to a long-term Test career. The next time through, he made 692 runs in 4 Tests, averaging 86.5, including 4 centuries. The summer of 14-15 belonged to Kohli and Steve Smith, and the time after, he led India to its first series victory here. In all, he played 30 Test matches against Australia and made 9 centuries. But the mark of greatness, 7 of those centuries were made in Australia. His valedictory innings in Perth at the start of last summer stood him behind only distant echoes, Walter Hammond and Jack Hobbs, for centuries in this country. The phenomenon of Kohli, having observed him through portions of his career, was his magnetic presence, not only at the crease but in the field. He drew every eye, and the game tended to revolve around him. I was there one morning in Bengaluru when he altered the course of a Test match through his sheer force of personality. Australia had beaten India in Pune and skittled them for 189 at the start of the second Test. The tourists were cruising on morning 2, so Kohli threw a ball directly at Dave Warner's head. It was deliberately provocative and quite outrageous, and it made the game a tinderbox. Kohli took command of the environment from the field. He roused the crowd as surely as Hulk Hogan in his pomp. India fought back and overwhelmed Australia, and by the end of the game, the series was in the grip of international incident. Kohli was not only unapologetic, he managed to blame Australia, who he accused of cheating in their use of the DRS. Such was his way. He once hijacked the crowd in Perth when Australia was completely unsure how to play in the aftermath of the sandpaper incident, and that helped Tim Paine figure out how to lead as those couple of days unfolded. But elsewhere, when Kohli didn't like fans in England taunting Steve Smith over the infamous incident, he stepped forth to quiet the madding crowds. And thus there was nuance to our relationship with him, a statesman and an antagonist all at once. Peter Lawler suggests this morning, nobody is irreplaceable, but nobody can replace Virat. That feels about right. Our great nemesis has left the game. Whatever will we do now?
Firstly, I think it's a good retirement, watching, the Test matches last year, virtually half volley length just outside off stump, the Kohli that bounced onto the scene and scored his first Test 100 in Australia all those years ago. He was bludgeoning those half volleys through the covers like I'd never seen a touring batsman do before. But, I don't think we can imagine what it's like to captain India. The most similar batter to Indian batsman to Virat Kohli is Sachin Tendulkar, but we saw that Sachin battled to captain and be the chief run scorer, whereas Kohli seemed to embrace that. I think of him, his physicality in the field and how fit he was. So I think he changed the culture of India off field with their fitness, but also the way that they fielded as a group. And I think he really set standards that took India, and he was perfect for the IPL moving into that. Very passionate, combative. He certainly was a batsman at his peak that you wouldn't want to sledge. You wouldn't want him to spark up a little bit. Often he'd go hunting for it to get himself going. And as a batsman, probably until this last tour, even though he scored 100 in Perth, I think that 2013-14 series here in Australia where he scored 400. So I think it's the peak for a touring batsman that I saw against a strong Australian attack. I think just with the pressure of being an Indian captain, to be such a dominant player in all three forms, probably 50 over the ultimate Virat Kohli. He set a legacy. And one other thing, what I loved about and what is important, we need the Indian captain of Test cricket to be passionate about Test cricket and to drive it, because we know that they do so much, 90% of the income that comes in. We don't want an Indian captain who doesn't mind Test cricket, a bit blasé about it. He was passionate. And even through that series last summer where he couldn't get runs in the field, he was definitely up. He wanted to win, working with the fast bowlers. So he was an absolute beauty.
I loved in the paper this morning, Robert Craddock wrote him as a showman, an artist and a street fighter because that's so perfect. He retired with some beautiful words in a social post after 14 years in the kitchen of Test cricket in India. Yes, he waned towards the end, causing a magnificent average of mid-50s to fall below 50, which is a bit of a shame because he's well worth mid-50s. He broke a century drought in Perth last summer on one of the trickiest wickets you could bat on, but totaled only 190 runs for the series. Caught behind was his mode of dismissal. All innings last summer, he was caught behind, just nicking and nibbling. 300s since 2020, that's all, and he averaged 30, not that 55 that I said he's worth. He's initiated great success to the biggest nation and brought them out of themselves to stand up. They had and have someone to revere in Sachin Tendulkar. There's someone to trust in MS Dhoni to get a job done. And Virat provided them someone to stand up with when the battles get tough. That's what Kohli did. He's a great fighter. I've never known a better succession than those three in any sporting dynasty. The microscope of their jobs is incredibly hot, trying to be the hero for India. Nowhere is it hotter, and yet they achieve so highly in all their formats constantly. They are greats of our game. To retire with a heart full of gratitude, having been tested, shaped and taught by the great game of Test cricket. Little does he know that the biggest game in our world, that being India, owes him plenty. Nice retirement, Virat.
Do you have a favourite Virat Kohli moment?
Yes, I was in commentary on a panel at a halftime break in one of the day's play, and I it was a bit noisy out in the field, but where we were doing it, and I sort of said, and that's why I think this guy is the best batsman I've ever seen. And Mark Nicholas, our host, was sort of going to the next question over here, and he went, oh, what? You just said you're the best player you've ever seen? Yes, he is. And that's how highly regarded I was of Virat Kohli.
Do you still stand by that?
Halfway through his career.
Stand by that?
He's just in a mix. You can't split because he's down to Sachin in tests.
Yes.
And then incredible in one days and T20 internationals. He averaged 49 in T20s, international T20s. So, yeah, I can't. But his 9,000 runs doesn't stack up to the 5,100s that Sachin made in Test.
Oh, undoubtedly one of the greatest players we've ever seen. Certainly across all three formats. I know his Test career his numbers took a bit of a dive towards the end. I think a lot of the batters do when they get a little bit older. But, Virat's ability to entertain crowds all over the world has been second to none. And I certainly, remember pinching myself at times watching him bat. I remember one innings at the Wacker, is actually the Test match. We had a couple of run-ins, but his innings in that first innings was absolutely extraordinary. And when he was in full flight, I don't think there's been too many batters that have ever played the game that are better than him. So, extraordinary player, great entertainer, feisty, competitive, real fighter. And it's very rare that you get those qualities with someone as skilled as what he was as well. So I think he's changed the face of Indian cricket. They've become a really disciplined, fit, fighting, competitive cricketing country. I think what they used to have was probably highly skilled players who you would probably question their fitness and attitude towards being absolute professionals. I think Virat Kohli changed that on his own throughout his career and led by example. And as I said, he will go down as one of, if not the best batter we've ever seen.
Just any flare-ups that live on in the memory for you? I mean, just given you spent so much time on any given match day standing in close proximity to the man?
No, not really. I mean, as I said, he for an Indian player, he was the first one that probably came and really got in our face. And that was something that the Australian teams have kind of always been renowned for, I guess. So he was, for me, one of the first ones that really stood up and started giving it back. And, whilst we loved going against him and giving it back to him at times, we clearly highly respected him, not only as a player, that's goes without being spoken about, but just the way he was prepared to fight and stand up for himself and his country. It was really cool to play against him, to be honest, and to see the passion and how much he loved playing for India and how good he was one of the highlights of my career.
And tactically as well, how did you observe him to actually captain against and to plot and scheme against?
Yeah, again, I think he captained in his own way. I thought he was, there's a lot of talk about how you should captain and being calm. I think Virat was, at times, he was emotional, but he was a hard-on-the-sleeve kind of player, and that's when he was at his best. So I think it's important for any leader when you are leading teams that you're true to yourself. And I think it's fair to say that Virat was exactly that. I think he mellowed a little bit as his career went on, but he was always that agitator, always super fiery, and as I said, wore his heart on his sleeve. And people loved watching him, not only when he was batting, but also when he was in the field. He was always entertaining.
Bharat Sundaresan was there for his first Test match and there for his last Test match. Bharat, great to have you on the program.
Thanks, Gerard. I have to firstly say I'm standing outside this hair salon wearing the apron. I think only I can get away with it while I speak to you about Virat Kohli. And I'm getting goosebumps just listening to those amazing calls from you guys over the years to what Virat meant to Australia.
So to have bookended his career, sometimes there are moments where you take pause of the privilege of what we get to do. I imagine this is one.
Oh, very much so. And it didn't even hit me immediately yesterday, Gerard. Like, I saw the news, we thought it was coming. There were reports a few days ago. And I was like, hang on. I was there when he faced his first ball in Test cricket all those years ago at the Sabina Park in Kingston. And again, I was there sitting right next to Tom Morris when he was nicked off by Scott Boland a few months ago. So very surreal. And, you're right. I mean, you realize the privilege that you had 14 long years. And the one thing I'll never forget about that 2011 tour is the first and only time he was dropped from an Indian team. And throughout that period, Jared, throughout that tour, I kept asking him for an interview and he said yes. And I kept stitching him up because I kept interviewing other people because he wasn't scoring any runs. And he was polite enough to be patient. He was patient to wait for me. And then I interviewed him. And the question I asked is why are you doing this, Virat? You've been dropped from the team. Your highest score is 30 after 3 tests. You average 15. And he said, because this is just the beginning. I know I'll become a very successful Test cricketer. I know I'll be a big name for India across all formats. And that's why I don't look at this as the end of anything. I have nothing to be ashamed of. And it was a great insight into the man that is Virat Kohli. And now the boy back then, 22 years old. And well, in a way, both him and I have grown up to be adults, though I think he's a bit more edgier than I am.
Why now, Bharat? It felt like there was an end point coming, but we weren't quite sure when it would be.
Yes, and we saw it in Australia, didn't we, Gerard? You could see, we spoke about this off air as well, a great athlete just trying his desperate to just hold on to something, like trying to turn the clock back. And he just couldn't. He kept nicking off, and you could see him getting so angsty with himself towards the end. You remember the BCCI came up with a few diktats about family and how much they can travel. Some called it the 10 new commandments of Indian cricket. And one of them was like the restriction on family travel. And from what we're hearing now, I think that played a huge role in Virat deciding it was time. You remember he went back from Adelaide back in 2020 for the birth of his first child. Last year, he missed an entire series against England at home because, Anushka, his wife, was expecting a second child. And I think that's played such a big role in his life. And he's been very categorical, even in a recent interview, that he wants family around. And once that looked like it could be an issue, I think he's just decided to choose family over sport, which in a way it's a great thing. I mean, it's a very modern day thing you could say, but it kind of tells you the perspective he's got now about life.
It's a defining era in Indian cricket. So what are the great eras and where does Kohli sit in your mind?
I think even though India have been playing Test cricket since the 1930s, I think Sunil Gavaskar really put that first era into place. 1971, he makes his debut. And that's around the time when hockey and cricket were still competing to be the national sport. I mean, hockey is still officially India's national sport. But I think Gavaskar and what he achieved, Gerard, the first guy to make 10,000 Test runs, he made it India's national sport. And then along came Sachin Tendulkar 2 years after Gavaskar retired. And then everything changed. India changed. And cricket became India's obsession. Like it just went from being a sport that everybody loved to watch to a sport that really got the country ticking. But then Virat Kohli took it, in my opinion, to the next level. He made it India's identity. Now, wherever you go, whether you follow cricket or not, people know about Virat Kohli. I think he transcended the sport. And there is a reason why, the likes of Harsha Bhogle have often said he kind of, in a way, embodies the confidence and the self-assuredness that Indian men and Indian women and the next generation of Indians have. And Virat Kohli became a poster boy for that.